Good morning. Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa. I'm one of the pastors here. Great to see you this morning. I'm just curious, how we feeling? How'd you sleep last night? Did anyone get an amazing sleep last night? Okay. How many just lousy or didn't sleep at all? I know I talked to a few of you. Okay. Yeah, I didn't sleep well myself. I rarely do the nights before I speak. But as I was laying in bed last night, trying to fall asleep, I was thinking of this. Isn't it so amazing that God designed our human bodies to optimally function when we're asleep a third of the day? So, we have to be asleep a third of our lives for us to really fully function in the way He's created us to be. Don't you find that crazy? I find that crazy. Sometimes I'm like, He could have just made us bears and we could hibernate. I heard an amen. All right. But God's designed us with limits for our good so that we can be fully healthy, functioning, so we can repair, we can rest. And it's part of who God made us to be, and I think it tells us a lot of who God is and what matters to God. And I've been thinking a lot about limits as I've been preparing for this message today. And, as I was thinking about some limits when I was growing up as a teenager, back, when we had to pay for long-distance phone calls. Remember that? Some kids in here are like, what are you talking about? Long distance? I remember having a conversation with my boyfriend at age 16. I said, the phone bill's $20. This is serious. We can't keep doing this. Or how about, as a kid, when you'd get to go to a special restaurant like Ponderosa. Anybody remember Ponderosa? Yes. Does it even exist anymore? Does it? I don't know. Buffets are kind of, that's popular, but if I got to go to Ponderosa after church on Sunday, I hit the lottery. And the best part was what? The ice cream maker. Yes, making your own sundaes. So we love it when we don't have limits. And I was just brainstorming all different kinds of phrases that we would use with if it's unlimited. Well, first of all, everybody gets unlimited minutes now. We don't have to wait till after 9 o'clock to get unlimited minutes anymore. Unlimited data. We love it when we have unlimited car washes. Anybody have unlimited car washes? Just zip through, Crew Car Wash whenever you can. Students, wouldn't you just love it if your parents would say, today, unlimited screen time. Just have at it, guys. Unlimited. Or stay out as late as you want. No curfew. Some of you might think that's pretty cool. Disney World. Unlimited rides, unlimited access, anywhere in the park you want to go. We just love unlimited. Inclusive vacations, unlimited food, unlimited drink, unlimited excursions. We just love it when it's unlimited. Streaming, unlimited channels. The minute any kind of limit is placed on us, sometimes there is some resistance. But limits, in their context, they're good, aren't they? They're for our protection. They're for our health, and the older we get, the more limits we're aware of, That double scoop ice cream cone just doesn't hit like it used to, unfortunately, in my case. We have limits on our time and our energy, on what our bodies can and cannot do. Kids, enjoy it while you got the bodies that you have, because it's amazing when you're young. And now, as we think about limits, and we think about when unexpected limits are placed on us, those don't go over well that good either. This morning at about 7:30, I get a text from Jill that says, the Panera oven broke down last night, and they only can bring us 91 bagels this morning. And I'm like, what? Of course, they compensated with pastries, but guys, if you were coming for a cinnamon crunch bagel this morning and we were out, that's what happened. The oven broke at Panera. And we had to deal with our limits. But as we think about limits today, I want us to also turn our attention and ask this question: how does God use limits in our own journey, in our own lives of becoming more like Him? Because I believe that limits are part of our formation. So we're continuing on in our summer series, The Church at Philippi. and we are in week 2, and it's the church. It's the book of Philippians about the church at Philippi. It is not the book of the Philippines, like I by mistake said this week. I'm going to, teach out of the Philippines. Philippians, guys, Philippians, all right? So a small book in the back of the New Testament. It's a letter that Paul and Timothy wrote. It's super encouraging, super wise, and we get a chance to slow down and for 10 weeks this summer study it together. And I thought as we begin, before we dive into our text, I want us to engage our imaginations a little bit, and I want us to get a little bit more of a background of the church at Philippi, because it's so important as we understand a little bit of what Paul is writing and why he's writing what he's writing. And so you can pretend just for a brief moment that you are the church at Philippi. Can you do that? Awesome. I'm so glad you said yes. So you are the church at Philippi, and the first thing you need to know is that you're a Roman colony. And I think we have a map here that we can show. All right. There's a lot of Mediterranean Sea going on here, but right up here it says Philippi, and this is also modern-day Greece. Okay, here's Italy, and this region was called Macedonia back in first century. All right, so Philippi was a stop that Paul made on his missionary journeys, and you were the first church he planted in the European continent. Pretty cool. Yes. You're about 12 years old, so pretty young as a church. And you started because Paul and some of the people he was traveling with wanted to go have a prayer meeting on the Sabbath, and they went down by a river at Philippi in your town. And while they were at the river, they encountered some women that were down there. And one of the women's names was Lydia, and she was dealing purple cloth, and she was a businesswoman. And by the looks of her and how she was dealing her cloth, she was pretty wealthy. And as Paul was beginning to talk about, because, Paul loves to talk about Jesus, as he started talking about Jesus, you realize Lydia was a worshiper of God, and Lydia responded to the message of the good news of Jesus. And not just did Lydia respond in faith, but the people that was with Lydia and her whole household wanted to be baptized right there at the river. They just immediately had a little baptism service, which is awesome. And she was so overcome by this, friendship with Paul that was beginning, and her conversion to Christianity and really knowing more of the message of Jesus. She says, please come to my house. And her hospitality and her generosity helped launch your church. Church at Philippi. So that's how you began, was on the banks of this river and in the home of Lydia. Well, over the years, you have kept in contact with Paul. You have prayed for Paul. In fact, you heard that he needed resources, and Lydia, among other people in your church, have generously supported him and all of his travels. He has come through your town again, and you celebrated the Feast of Unleavened Bread together for a whole week. So you love each other. You're great friends. You care about him. You want to know how he's doing. You even sent someone in your congregation called Epaphroditus, how about that for a name, to go encourage Paul because he needed it. But now you've heard that your friend Paul is behind bars. He's in prison. And so naturally, you're worried about him, and you wonder how he's doing. You're wondering if your resources made it to him. You're wondering, did Epaphroditus make it? And this seems very inconvenient because Paul is a traveler. He's an apostle. He wants to go spread the good news of Jesus, but now this traveler, this church planner, is behind bars. Very inconvenient, very untimely. How is he going to start more churches? How is he going to travel to more areas? How is he going to raise up more leaders? How is he going to plant, more churches like you guys? He's literally bound up in chains. So that's problem one, is he's locked up. But problem two is who has him locked up, and it's called the palace guard. And we got a picture of the palace guard. I know, it's kind of like a statue or whatever. Look at these guys. They don't look that scary. Oh, but they are. Oh, but they are. You need to know a little bit about the palace guard, okay? Also known as the Praetorian Guard, and they work for the emperor, which is Nero at this time in history. Nero is an evil dude. I won't even get into how evil and horrific this ruler is, but the palace guard works with him and in the imperial palace, and they are elite troops. They are highly trained. You could think of them like bodyguards. You could think of them like security agents. They monitored threats. They gathered intelligence. They did covert operations. They enforced and maintained order in Rome. So in other words, you can kind of think of these guys as like, I don't know, the Secret Service, the CIA, and retired Navy SEALs, all right? So those are kind of the areas of influence that they had. They were powerful, they were privileged, and they were in the middle of all the decisions and top secret stuff that was going on. So needless to say, you didn't want to make them mad. And these guys had Paul. The other thing you need to know about the palace guard is they're kind of a blend of like this political presence, but also kind of cultish, because there's what was called the imperial cult at the time, and you're like, ooh, what's that? Well, I mean, they'd kind of worship Nero. They'd kind of worship the emperor. They'd offer sacrifices, see him as like a divine spirit, participate in ceremonies, building temples. Nero had his face on coins and on statues and on monuments. And this was all part of the culture that is going on at the time. People address Nero often as Lord, as a sign of supreme authority. And one more thing you need to know about this time, and this is very common for you. Sorry, it's hard for me to pretend that you're Church of Philippi and then you're Commonway. Anyway, we're just going to go with it. Is that when there was a special announcement made in the Roman Empire, like there was a royal birth or there was a military victory or something like that, it was called good news. It was called gospel. It would be proclaimed through the whole empire if there was an announcement of peace. And at the time they spoke Greek, and so that word there was evangelion, Greek word for good news, for gospel. Sound familiar? So, Church at Philippi, if you're able to pick up any of that cool stuff, if you have your notes, I made a section for cool stuff. Hopefully you thought that was cool. But thank you, Tyler. Your dearly loved pastor's in prison. And you're like, what are we going to do with this? This isn't good news. But he was in prison because he was proclaiming what? A different kind of good news. A different kind of gospel, something that was highly subversive. He wasn't saying emperor was Lord. Paul was declaring what? Jesus Christ is Lord. And so when you see these words, good news and gospel in the New Testament, that is very intentional for the culture of the day, to announce a different kingdom and a different empire that Jesus Christ was ushering in. And so all this uproar is affecting you, and it's creating actual hardship in your life as well, because you're wanting to be faithful followers of Jesus as a church. And people are being persecuted for this message. Okay, now we can get into our text with all that added information you have. We're in Philippians 1:12, and it begins like this. So I want you to pretend like you're really hearing this letter from Paul after what you have just learned. Listen to what he says, verse 12. Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to what? Advance the gospel. As a result of this gospel advancing, what does he say? It has become clear throughout the whole palace guard, you know who those guys are now, and to everybody else that I am in chains for Christ. What's Paul saying? He's like, hey, psst, the opposite happened. My chains have done the exact opposite of what they were intended to do. Instead of slowing down my message, the chains have actually accelerated and moved the message of Jesus Christ forward in greater ways. Isn't that ironic? Not only has the imprisonment accelerated the message of Jesus, but this whole good news, this new gospel that was being proclaimed, was dropped right in the middle of Nero's imperial system. You know, think of it like in America, of it being dropped right in the middle of the White House, or on Capitol Hill, or at the Pentagon, or at a military base. Paul is among the most powerful and influential people of the empire, and that's where God has him, in chains. And he says, it's become clear. Paul can see it so clear. Or the palace guard, throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else, that I am in chains. For Nero? No, for Jesus Christ. He says the name of Christ is spreading. It's advancing. What could have been perceived as a barrier has been a launching pad. Don't you love it when God does that? And here we're reminded of a powerful truth, and this is our key idea for the day, is that God is not limited. Wow, why is it down there? I don't have anything planned to put up here, but, you know, at least it's there. That's funny. Never had that happen before. God is not limited by our limits. He's just not. Paul was in chains, but God wasn't chained at all. Paul couldn't travel, but the message was traveling just fine. And the audience that Paul had might have been smaller than what he wanted, but guess what? God gave him way more, way bigger of an influence. God wasn't limited by Paul's limits, and he's not limited by yours. I thought it was really great. Thank you, Nathan, for the songs that you led us in this morning, because we've already kind of been thinking a little bit about this and praying through this morning. That God's not limited by impossible things or limits in our life. What may be perceived as a limit could be an opportunity. And I have this question. Can we look? Hopefully it's in the middle. Let's see. Oh, it's down there too. Interesting. We'll figure that out later. Sorry, it's not up here if you can't read it. You can look up at the screens up there. But let's ask this question. Can we look beyond our limits, beyond the constraints of our circumstances, and have eyes to see our limitless God? Can we do that? Lord, can you help us look beyond our limits, behind all the things that seem to be getting in the way of what our agenda is, or what purely of heart, God, we think that God's guiding us to do, and see that we have a limitless God? Well, God did that for Paul. God enabled that to do that, and God positioned him right in the middle, like I said, of one of the most powerful political military groups of the empire. And to further underscore this point, I'm going to cheat a little bit and jump ahead to chapter 4, verse 22, because this also helps give a little bit of support for this point. Paul's closing his letter, and as they often do, they tell you who sends their greetings. And what does he say? He says, all God's people here send you greetings, especially those who belong to what? Caesar's household. That's crazy. There are believers in Caesar's household. And when it says household, I mean, maybe it means family, but it could mean more like workers, anybody on the support staff, administrators, guards, slaves, doctors, cooks, all those people. Paul ends his letter and says that. Well, it's because these people matter to Jesus too. How was the message going to get to them? By dropping Paul right in the middle. Well, Paul keeps going with even more surprising news, and in verse 14, he says this. Verse 14, and because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become more confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. How about that? He says even more so, people are growing in courage and confidence, and they're able to proclaim this good news, and they're not scared. So not only is the message of Jesus growing, but people are like being emboldened and empowered. Opposition wasn't making them weaker, it was making them stronger. It was building their faith. Imagine how this must have hit the church of Philippi when they heard this news. And isn't courage contagious? Isn't it contagious when you see people stand up for something, especially if they're getting resisted or persecuted for it, and you believe in it? Like the brave ones stand up and inspire courage in others. But on the flip side, what also can happen in movements, right, is it not only inspires the good people to speak up, but sometimes you get some that stir up the bad as well. And Paul continues, and we see some of that happening here. Next verse 15. Paul writes, he says, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry. Maybe the church at Philippi had gotten some rumors that this was happening. Maybe that had spread. Paul writes, but others out of goodwill. The latter, meaning those out of goodwill, do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. He says, however, the former, the ones who are speaking it out of envy and rivalry, preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. Well, how about that? People taking advantage of it and trying to stir up trouble for Paul. He's saying, hey, we've got two different kinds of people here. We've got the sincere ones and we have the insincere ones. We have the ones that want to carry the message out of love, and we have the ones that are trying to stir up trouble for me, who don't care about the cause at all. And you're like, well, how is Paul going to respond to this? Let's continue reading verse 18. What does he say? He says, but what does it matter? What does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of that, I rejoice. Now, I read this, and I'm like, what does it matter, Paul? What does it matter? It matters. Rise up, it matters. Because if people are going to represent Jesus, we want them to represent him well. Like, I think that matters, right? Doesn't God care about our motives? I would think so. And how we spread the good news. We've seen plenty of people share the good news of Jesus in ways that are off-putting. But as I kind of rise up and I'm feeling indignant about this response from Paul, well, what does it matter? There's like this, as I was studying this week, like this little gentle whisper that said, hey, Lisa, have you ever spoken about me with false motives? Hey, Lisa, have you ever, done ministry out of selfish ambition or shared my name? Or I was like, yeah, probably way more than I'm aware of. I think that's true of all of us. I mean, if we would wait for all of our motives to be pure, we probably wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, right? We're human, and as much as we try, sometimes there's still some false stuff in there. It's just the process of God forming us to be more like himself. And so I'm so grateful for this, aren't you? That Paul's able to say, hey, this is the most important thing, and gosh, God is still working through them, and isn't that gracious of God to do that? And I'm thankful that God isn't limited by our poor character. I'm so thankful for that. So Paul is processing this in his letter, and I think he is so wise to draw their attention to what he said is, I love this, he says, the important thing. The important thing. He was able to see what was worth his energy. He could handle if the motives were false. But he's like, let's put our focus on what's important here, and that's the name of Jesus being proclaimed. And he wanted to draw their attention to that. He took the focus off his chains, and he turned his attention to what God was doing in all of it. And you could say that he had this perspective, like that's what I call perspective. Some might call it eternal perspective or divine perspective or kingdom perspective, whatever you want to call it. But I've kind of captured it with this prayer. If we can put it down there. It's like a game, guys. Is it going to be high or low? We don't know. This prayer, and it's this. Jesus, help me to see this a little more like you see it. What is important here? Because I think Paul was able to do this, of just like had his Jesus lens on or something. It's like, I want to be able to see this a little bit more like you see it. We're never going to be able to see something fully like God sees it. But if it could be a little bit more and a little bit more, don't you think that would be helpful? And if he would give us the discernment to know what is most important. Because I think so oftentimes in unwanted circumstances, I think it's natural for us to cry out and say, why? And I have found, for me, that's kind of a futile exercise. God doesn't answer our whys, rarely, ever. And if we think we know, I'd say let's be humble with that. It's not up to us to figure out the whys of God. And sometimes there aren't answers and there won't ever be them. But to simply pray, Jesus, I need your perspective. I need to see how you see this a little bit more like you see it. Show me what's important. And you know, your circumstances might not change, but your heart might. Your heart might. The way you think about it might. I'm sure for Paul, he'd say, hey, this is not what I would choose in a million years. In terms of it happening like that, he did appeal to Caesar, so okay, he's there. But I don't think he could deny the fact that he was seeing goodness and beauty happen in the middle of the palace guard. Paul was able, he saw the opportunity for the gospel to be spread among influential people. He saw courage rise up in Jesus' followers. He saw God's grace cover over imperfection and bad character. And he was able to uphold what's the most important thing. And in this situation, he's saying, I just want the name of Jesus to go forth. I want that to be the one that's raised up. He had eyes to see that God didn't need ideal situations or perfect people to bring about his work. And isn't that good news? God doesn't need ideal situations. I often like to put forward an ideal situation. God doesn't need that. He can work with what we give him. God can work through weakness. He can work through poor character. He can work through bad systems, and he can work through a corrupt government. And Paul saw all of it happening while he was in prison. And his response, Philippians 1:19, he says, and because of this, I rejoice. He rejoiced. He's always rejoicing. It's kind of annoying, I think. Paul, always rejoicing. We're going to get reminded of it a few more times in this letter this summer. He's like, oh, I rejoice. He's always finding a reason to rejoice. And maybe this summer, I'll grow in more rejoicing to be able to see things like he was able to see them. He endured an immense amount of suffering, and he knew that he would continue, and he's telling the people at Philippi, hey, this is the situation here. The circumstances are comfortable, but when we focus on what's important, when God gives us the eyes to see a little bit more like him, I think we can respond in gratitude and we can rejoice. And he continues on in verse 19, which I don't have on the screens today, and we're going to go into it more next week. But he's like, I'm going to continue to rejoice because I know that through your prayers and through the provision of the Spirit, God's going to deliver me in this. So he was able to accept his limits. He was able, because he knew somehow, some way, God was going to move in the situation. I remember, oh gosh, what was it now? About 14 years ago, probably one of my most powerful lessons on me accepting my own limits. Many of you know that I have struggled with back issues since college due to a volleyball injury. But I was through another bout of significant back pain in like my early 30s. And just so bad I couldn't sit up more than a few minutes. And it just really got in the way of a lot of just normal everyday tasks and travel. And one of my exercises that I was given to do was laying on my back with my palms towards heaven, with my leg kind of strapped in this apparatus. I looked really ridiculous. People are like, what are you doing? But it was supposed to help my body get more into alignment and help my spine and my back and all the intricacies of all the things that were out of whack. And as I lay there, I'd sometimes lay there for an hour and a half just doing nothing. And I remember praying, and I was just kind of in protest. I said, God, this is really stupid. I said, I'm not doing anything. Because, if I'm in therapy, I want to do something, like show me an exercise, even if it's just, well, that wouldn't be for my back. But some other movement that would be helpful to my healing. But for this situation, it was just lay there and let the rest do its work. And as I was having this prayer time with God and my, kind of my protesting, I just sensed in my spirit this thought, Lisa, just like you resting there is helping to realign your back and heal, your resting in your heart is helping realign some things that I want to touch, that I want to heal, that I want to bring wholeness to. And it was in that moment that I just was able to embrace my limits a little bit more and realize that there is purpose in the resting. There is purpose in embracing that part of my journey, not just physically, but God sometimes wants to give us a twofer, guys. He wants to give you, He wants to heal you in here as a result of what you're dealing with out here. Because God is kind and He's gentle with us and He wants to do that. So I don't know what kind of limits you came in with this morning. And maybe during that exercise or that prayer time that Nathan so well led us through, something came to mind for you that would apply to this. Maybe you're dealing with a significant illness. Maybe work is nuts. Maybe you're always working overtime and you're exhausted. Maybe your family responsibilities are an all-time high. Maybe your kids need you and your aging parents need you and you have no time for yourself. Or you've been exhausted looking for options for a new job and every door is shut. You feel like you've tried everything in a situation, nothing is working. Your bank account is at an all-time low and there's some things, projects or needs that you have that you're like, is God going to meet this? Can't seem to live up to your boss's expectations. Can't get a good night's rest to save your life. Maybe you've been working on this initiative or some type of assignment or service deal, and you really feel called that God has asked you to do it, and nothing seems to be aligning. And you just hit limit after limit. Well, I was reminded of a special prayer this week, and as I looked into it and a little bit more of the history behind the prayer, I learned that it was written by a man named, I might butcher his name, Reinhold Niebuhr. You don't have to put it up yet, so just hold off back there. And he was a German-American pastor and theologian. Some of his works and beliefs are a little controversial, but he contributed some great prayers, and this one particular one we still use to this day. He wrote this in 1932, and as it gained popularity, if you think about what was going on in history and world history at the time, it was in the Great Depression. And also, it endured 2 world wars And it was a time when people were debating about justice and social reform. And this prayer was written in 1932, and then it was put in a booklet and sent to soldiers overseas in World War II in the early 40s. And it was later adapted by Alcoholics Anonymous. So some of you may know of it as the Serenity Prayer. Now you can put it up. And I wanted to read this today with you. And most of the time, we only hear about the first part of this prayer, because this is the most popular part. But there's actually a second part that I think is equally profound. And so as I close off our time today, I'm just going to read this through and say a bit, and then we're going to read it together as a church and close off our time. And I believe I also have it in your notes as well as part of a kind of a take-home practice. But just listen as I read this prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever. There's so much in here about embracing limits, about acknowledging them, and kind of the tension that we have between what's ours to do and what's ours out of our control. And I love how it even gives a nod to Jesus and how he took on limits. I mean, Jesus took on the limits of a human body to live in this world so he could live among us and love us and give us hope for our future. So as we wrap up our time, I want you to maybe just hold something that has come to mind in this service together of a limit you might have, a situation, somewhere where you would love for God to show you his limitless power in it. Maybe a situation where you're like, help me to see it more like you, how you see it. Jesus, what's most important? And kind of hold that in your heart, and we're going to read this together. Okay? All right, let's read this together. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever. I guess I didn't have that in the next on my notes. Good job. Amen. In your notes, there are some ideas for some practices this week. I think one of the best formational practices in helping us embrace limits and trust God is Sabbath. And so there's some notes in there about that, whether that's stopping for an hour or two or a whole day. But encourage you as well as that prayer. So may the Lord give us grace. May the Lord give us grace to be able to acknowledge our limits, but know that we serve a limitless God. Would you stand with me? Also want to invite our prayer team to come forward. I believe Steve and Keesa are over there, Terry and Debbie over here at the tables. Guys, if you came in with something and you really want someone to pray for you, we make this available every week. Please take advantage of it. If there's something on your heart right now, they would love to pray with you. And as someone has told me often, don't miss out on your blessing. So encourage you to pray with them, and they'll hold that with you this morning. All right. Well, may you go in the peace of Jesus today. And will you hold just this truth so dear in your heart that God is not limited by your limits. Bless you.